In today's Farm Report, winter may seem like an ideal time to start getting plants started indoors if you want to plant them right away in the spring. But as the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office's Beth Berlin explains, you should check to see when it's going to bear fruit.
Now is getting close to the time. You really want to know how long that plant needs until, for example, vegetables, until it's producing that vegetable. And so some of the crops need to get started here in the next week or so.
And Berlin gives some tips for choosing seed.
First off, make sure you're purchasing a very dependable, reliable seed source. Those that have been sitting around for years, and frankly, even some of the more inexpensive ones that have been on discount, just don't have the percentage of germination that they may have once had. And so select good seed, and then start with good, clean containers, and good, clean soil growing medium is critical. And
instead of using soil as the initial medium for seeds, Berlin suggests a nice alternative.
We actually encourage people to use a soil-less mixture. And so this consists of vermiculite and peat mixture. There's a lot of different products on the market, but it's truly soil-less because it's just consisting of vermiculite and peat, which is just a very lightweight medium that's sterile and allows for these seeds to go ahead and get their roots started without having conflict with compacted soil material.
Berlin also talks about proper lighting.
And this is kind of a misconception, and some might have had success over the years, but they think a sunny window is going to cut it. And honestly, unfortunately, here in Minnesota, we're still not seeing enough sun to help these poor little seedlings to get started, and they need to be placed under some growing lights. And when I say growing lights, it doesn't need to be fancy labeled. Frankly, any sort of cool white fluorescent lighting is adequate, and you should have it on for 12 to 16 hours a day.
And Berlin also talked about the local food college, which is being hosted by Extension, and it'll be going on through March.
We do. Thanks for bringing that up. We are having the local food college once again. This was an 8-week series. It is free to the public, and the topic is on vegetable production tips and tricks. And so if you are interested in coming, it's here in the Government Center in Morrison County, down in the basement in Meeting Room 1 at 6 o'clock. And so myself or a master gardener will be on hand to help facilitate and answer any questions that people may have.
And we've been speaking with Beth Berlin, University of Minnesota Extension horticulturist.
Many major buyers of fruits and vegetables require that growers adopt so-called GAP measures, good agricultural practices designed to reduce the risk of microbial contamination and to have USDA audit and certify that growers are following those practices.
The biggest challenge for most growers is just knowing where to start.
Ken Peterson with USDA's Marketing Service says this is particularly true of small growers, and so coming up this Thursday, the 22nd, Ken and others at USDA are going to be hosting a webinar called GAP 102.
And it's really starting to look a little bit deeper into what's required of audit program and what growers need to do to prepare for an audit.
And the target audiences?
Smaller producers that may not have the resources to implement these types of programs on their own, that are in areas that are economically challenged, and disadvantaged producers.
But of course, anyone can join in. Again, it's this coming Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. For more information, ask your browser to search for GAP 102 webinar. We tried it. It took us right to the information, GAP 102 webinar. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The NFC and AFC championship games were played on Sunday, and now the Super Bowl is about a week and a half away. And the weather may play a factor in sunny Arizona. Gary Crawford with the U.S. Department of Agriculture shares some of the memorable games played in football history.
That NFL music has a tough edge to it, doesn't it? Almost conjuring up soldiers going to battle in the most difficult of conditions. And in fact,
if you pick just about any crazy weather phenomenon, you can find a football game that's been played in it.
Agriculture Department meteorologist and a football fan, Brad Rippey, we picked just a few of the crazy weather games of the past just for fun. And so, let's go back to
December 31st, 1967. the game that's become known as the Ice Bowl.
The NFL championship game, the warm weather Cowboys against the cold weather Packers in Green Bay on the coldest New Year's Eve ever recorded in Green Bay, 19 degrees below zero that morning, but it was a lot warmer by game time, 15 below. Now today, that game might have been postponed, but back then in Green Bay, no way. So let the game begin. That opening whistle, that was about the only one heard the whole game. The metal whistles kept freezing to the referee's lips, which had then to be pulled off along with the skin. And that bled, and the blood immediately froze, so the whole game was run verbally by the refs.
It was ridiculous. It just couldn't get any colder than it was.
Chuck Mersine, Packers running back or skating back that day because
the heating system under the field broke, so the field was just an absolute block of ice.
There was slipping, sliding, lots of pain as players hit the frozen turf, and finally the cold weather Packers won it 21-17. Another cold weather game with a twist, the so-called snowplow game.
That brings back a lot of bad memories.
At least for Miami Dolphins coach Don Shula. December 12th, 1982, the Dolphins and the Patriots in New England. Brad Rippey says,
there had been rain the night before the game, the field froze over, and then heavy snow fell pretty much throughout the entire game.
They could not keep that field cleared. No score for most of the game. Finally, at the end, a chance for a Patriot field goal, but the snow was so deep there was no way for the holder to place the ball. No problem, though. Patriot coach Ron Meyer calls timeout, sends a little tractor out there with a snow brush on it, clears out a space for the kick. The kick is good. The Patriots are happy, and Shula, well...
I later petitioned the commissioner that it was the most unfair act that's ever been perpetrated, and I wanted to score a change.
But that didn't happen. 3-0 Patriots. Time for one more. The famous Fog Bowl. New Year's Eve, 1988 playoff game, Philadelphia and Chicago in Chicago. Brad Rippey says partway through the game, a wind shift
brought in air off of Lake Michigan and pushed a fog bank across the stadium to the point where you could not see from one end of the field to the other. Visibility just a few yards.
So forget the passing game. Broadcasters and coaches up in the booths couldn't see anything.
And there's even talk now of suspending the game because the officials can't see the ball.
But they kept playing. Bears win at 2012. And there are many more games we could talk about. The Rain Bowl, the Mud Bowl, and on and on.
The purists, and count me as one of those, think that football should be played outside in all the elements.
After all, he is an element man. A weather man. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
If you are a beginning farmer or rancher, you will soon have new education and training resources coming your way, thanks to a reestablished Farm Bill program.
The Beginning Farmers and Ranchers Development Initiative is a program that the National Institute of Food and Agriculture supports. And the intent here is basically to develop ways to get new people coming into the farming and livestock production enterprises.
National Institute of Food and Agriculture Director Sunny Ramaswamy says funding applications are now being accepted for the program for fiscal year 2015. Applications for the over $18 million in funds are due by March 13th. Meanwhile, winning applications from FY14 will be announced soon.
These applicants could come from the traditional academic community, the land-grant universities that we work very closely with. It could come from community-based organizations. It could come from faith-based organizations. It could come from, for example, organizations that support veterans.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
I had a chance to speak with Dave Ladd, president of RDL and Associates and a leading egg policy expert here in Minnesota, about what he sees in the 2014 Congress.
Going forward, I think they'll challenge the GOP congressional majority on tax policy. More than likely, the area of agreement where I think Republicans and the administration, or at least initially here, can work together potentially is on trade. That may be their one real area of common ground. And so the question is, how much effort and muscle does the administration put behind bringing along some of those Democrats on these trade issues, including Trade Promotion Authority, which is shaping up to be one of the primary issues because we have trade agreements that are pending that have been moving forward. The European trade agreement is a bit further along. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership as well that's moving along. But trade agreements primarily, I think the next step is Trade Promotion Authority, what we used to call fast track, and I think you'll see the Senate Finance Committee take up that issue of Trade Promotion Authority.
Ladd also talked about how recent federal action has impacted the state actions on the Endangered Species Act.
That's actually interesting because that's where we see a nexus between what's been happening here at the state level when it comes to for example, the management of the gray wolf in the Great Lakes region. And prior years, last year, that was primarily a state issue. Although the Endangered Species Act is always kind of on the agenda. I think last year Senator Hatch of Utah had at least 3 bills related to the Endangered Species Act during the 113th Congress.
Ladd also talked about how Minnesota is being impacted by the recent move by the federal government to delist the gray wolf from the endangered species list.
Now that for Minnesota's interest in Minnesota and the Great Lakes region, on December 19th, there was a court ruling that essentially put the gray wolf back on the endangered species list. So what we're seeing now is it's moved from more of a state issue of how you manage the gray wolf and how the Minnesota DNR and Fish and Wildlife Service should be on the list. Do we have the right amount of data, good data? I would submit we probably could use better data when it comes to knowing what our gray wolf population is, based on science, not emotion. We always say that for agriculture as well, when it comes to regulatory issues.
We've been speaking with Dave Ladd, president of RDL and Associates, about the recent actions by the state and federal governments on the Endangered Species Act and how it will impact the gray wolf here in Minnesota and the Great Lakes region.
The State of the Union is strong.
Although the president in his State of the Union speech did not mention farmers or agriculture directly, he did touch on issues that touch on the ag sector. Many U.S. farmers depend on immigrant workers, and the president said if Congress tries to undo his executive actions on immigration,
I will veto it.
Instead, he urged the passage of a comprehensive immigration reform bill. U.S. farmers and other businesses also depend on exports.
That's why I'm asking both parties to give me trade promotion authority to protect American workers with strong new trade deals from Asia to Europe that aren't just free, but are also fair.
Also on trade, the trade embargo on Cuba has for decades stifled U.S. ag interests from selling in that market.
And this year, Congress should begin the work of ending the embargo.
Finally, farmers depend on ports, highways, railroads, and the internet to sell and move their products.
So let's set our sights higher than a single oil pipeline. Let's pass a bipartisan infrastructure plan that could create more than 30 times as many jobs per year.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.